Elliot knows the lay of that land and the whole land of Eretz Israel very well. He is an authority on Hezbollah, Hamas, Jihad, Islamic Republic. Um, he's a military strategist. He's an expert on military history in general, and certainly Israeli military history. So, with all of that, let me just say you've come to the right person to get an analysis and a read on what's going on. Elliot appears frequently on television talk shows as an analyst. So let's listen to what our friend Elliot Chodoff has to say about what's going on. And I see, looks like you are muted, so I appreciate that. And go ahead, Elliot.
Thank you, David. Thanks also for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. What I want to do this evening for me, this afternoon for you, is to go back, run through what has happened from the end of February and sort of preface it with some context, bring us up to date to where we are now, and look at essentially what we're looking at the next day or so. And here I'm going to start from the end. Nobody knows. It's true in general, and those who've heard me speak know that I don't do prophecy. I refuse to do prophecy. I'm a disciple of two great political philosophers, Winston Churchill and Yogi Berra, who both said it's best to prophesy about things that have already happened. In this particular case, I won't even go 24 hours forward. I'll lay out some of the possibilities. I'm going to leave that as my sort of my conclusion. So let's go back to February 28th. But in order to do that, we have to skip back a bit, because one of the things that we are constantly up against, and I don't want to go into an analysis of media, American or otherwise, misinformation, disinformation, poor analysis. This war did not begin on February 28th. This war began with Iran in 1979. And it is endemic to the Khomeiniist government that came into power in 1979, which, among other things, and I'm not going to give you a long history of Iran and Khomeinism, but among other things, declared war almost immediately on both the United States and Israel, and actually took it out or put it into practice first against the United States, taking the American embassy in Tehran, and from there it was downhill. American Marines killed in Beirut in the 1980s, embassies blown up, terrorist attacks throughout the world, materially supporting America's enemies in the Middle East and killing American troops. None of this is news, but it's important background, because the February 28th operation or campaign, which is what I would call it, didn't simply come out of the blue. It wasn't simply depending on whose misinformation, disinformation you want to believe, Trump waking up one morning and deciding to bomb the innocent Iranians, or Netanyahu convincing Trump to wake up one morning and bomb the innocent Iranians, is none of the above. Why he did it, particularly at that point, I'll come back to in a moment. But let's understand that from 1979, this conflict as a war exists, and vis-a-vis Israel, in rabid terms of referring to Israel as a cancer that needs to be eradicated. And in case anybody has any doubt, Iranian leaders for decades saying Israel is a one-bomb country, meaning one nuclear bomb. All we need to do is set off one nuclear bomb over Tel Aviv, and the Zionist entity is eliminated. Now, that's about as close to a nuclear threat as you're going to get anywhere in the world. We plan on eradicating this cancer by dropping a nuclear weapon on Tel Aviv. So that's all background. And one of the things that I've taught my students over the decades that I've been teaching my military and my university students is that when somebody holds a loaded gun to your head and says, I'm going to kill you, believe them. It is not prudent not to believe them. One of the consequences of that also is that it simplifies your decision making. Okay. In other words, if somebody's holding a loaded gun to your head, says, I'm going to kill you, your decision making narrows down to how do I prevent that from happening? And all the other background stuff kind of fades into non-existence. When October 7th happened, we went into an active military campaign, first of all with Hamas, almost immediately as well with Hezbollah, and I'll come back to Hezbollah in a moment because they're part of the story as well. And of course, the Houthis, who are Iranian proxies, and Iran itself, which, among other things, fired ballistic missiles and cruise missiles at Israel in the course of that campaign. So we had a round with them last year, what President Trump refers to as the 12-day war. Here again, I'm going to remind you, the 12 days was not a war, it was a campaign within the war. And what started now on February 28th. The origins of February 28th was actually the uprising that took place now a few months ago that was brutally put down by the Iranian regime, by the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And I want to emphasize that the IRGC is commonly mispronounced or misbroken down as the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. The I is for Islamic, because its purpose is to export the Islamic revolution to the world. It is not a conservative protection for the Iranian regime. It is an aggressive exporter of the Islamic revolution. And one of its subunits, the Quds Force, Quds named for Jerusalem, whose purpose it is primarily to support attacks against Israel, but also all around the world, and again, primarily against Israeli, Jewish, and American targets worldwide. That uprising was brutally put down, and depending on whose numbers you believe, and I have no way of verifying any of them, anywhere between 30,000 and 60,000 Iranians were murdered by the regime in the course of that uprising, and the executions are about to start for those who were captured during and the aftermath. And while it was going on, President Trump put out a social media statement: step it up, keep it up, help is on the way. And help never arrived. But it was the beginning of the hint that perhaps this regime, the Iranian regime, is not as strong as it made itself out to be. And America already got, the Trump administration got on this idea, this track, that it could launch some sort of operation against Iran. Now, did Israel support it actively? Absolutely. But so did the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Emiratis. Bahrain supported it, and others, but those primarily. In other words, this was not an Israel convince America operation. This was virtually the entire Middle East outside of Qatar and Turkey trying to convince America now is the time to step in. The regime has shown to be weakened by the uprising, but more importantly, the population seems to be ready to do it again. Now, frankly, in my opinion, that train left the station. In other words, that uprising ended by the time America got its act together. And here, I should just add parenthetically, one of the great differences between the Israeli military and the American military. We have many common issues, commonalities, common values, but one of the great differences between the two, and I say this not critically, but sort of geopolitically, geostrategically, analytically, is that Israel can be up and running in a couple of hours, a couple of days at most. It takes America a long time to get its act together, not because there's anything wrong with that, but because typically America doesn't have to respond that quickly to threats. to state the obvious, America is a huge country with huge oceans on its east-west borders, and a threat that generates itself somewhere on the other side of the world is a long time away from actually threatening the United States of America. Now, it may threaten American interests very quickly, but America can regain those. And the weight of America, and I don't denigrate the weight at all. The weight of America is massive, but it's measured in aircraft carriers, in massive amounts of aircraft, of forces that need to be moved, uh, typically by sea in any large quantities. And all of that takes time. It can take weeks. It can take longer than weeks if they're caught having to get organized. So what we saw is the convergence of American force to prepare or to be prepared for an attack on Iran happening only on the 26th and 27th of February. And at that point, the order was given to launch. The first strike that went in was Israeli, but here it's very important also for us to keep in mind that when the Israeli strikes hit, and they were primarily against the leadership of the regime, and they were devastatingly effective, killing not only Ayatollah Khamenei and severely wounding his son, who is now the supreme leader, but also taking out layers of leaders. If you're interested, I can go into the details, but put it up in Q&A. The American planes were already in the air. In other words, this was not an Israeli strike that triggered an American strike. This was an Israeli strike that was already coordinated with the Americans, who followed up almost immediately with strikes of their own. I want to digress for a moment about all of what went on in the course of the month plus of the airstrikes. Pilots, and I say this as an infantry officer with all due respect to pilots, I love those guys. Pilots get the credit. They're the knights in shining armor flying the magnificent flying machines, and I say it all with some amusement, but with absolute seriousness. The F-16s, the F-15s, the F-35s, the additional planes that the Americans are flying, incredible aircraft being flown by incredible people. The unsung heroes of this entire operation are the behind-the-scenes people, the planners, the air traffic control. Think about this: hundreds upon hundreds of combat aircraft flying over Iran with full coordination between them. And there have been a few comments made by American Air Force people, pilots, so they've never seen anything like the Israeli Air Force in the air. But here I want to say that combined, the U.S. and Israeli forces were coordinated at a level that is virtually miraculous. Now, I should also mention, the Americans' coordination was virtually miraculous. The United States has 4 air forces, and they don't normally talk to each other. There's the U.S. Air Force, there's the U.S. Navy, there's the U.S. Army, and the U.S. Marine Corps. They all have air forces, and they don't typically fly in the same theater simultaneously. The fact that the 4 of them plus the Israeli Air Force managed to reach a point where essentially everybody knew where everybody was and where everybody was going to be at all times, 24/7 over the course of over a month, is amazing. And that's number one. The other unsung heroes of all of this are the maintenance crews. We talk about losses, and here, with all seriousness of the American planes that were both shot down and the crash of the tankers in which aircrew were killed, given the massive scale of what has gone on, the fact that planes have not been lost to maintenance failures on the way in and on the way out, the fact that missions have been carried out at virtual 100% capability, is nothing short of logistically miraculous. So all of this is going on over the extended period of time. The targeting was planned to strip Iran, first of all, of its air defenses. That was done successfully in the early stages, of what little air force it had, also done early on, so that by the end of the first few days of the campaign, the Israeli and U.S. air capabilities were flying not air superiority, but air supremacy. In other words, there was no opposition. And that greatly facilitated the operation as well. Very, very little had to be committed to protection of those aircraft. And it meant that they were able to go in. And here, with all due respect to technology, long distance targeting is not as effective as short distance targeting. Aircraft were sent in close, and the percentage of hits went up to nearly 100%, and their effectiveness went up to nearly 100%. So air defenses were eliminated, Air Force was eliminated. The United States took on as a mission the destruction of the Iranian and IRGC navies, which it did. I'll come back to what's left when we talk about Hormuz. But a navy as the navy, and the Israeli Air Force took care of their Caspian Sea flotilla. Iran no longer has naval forces. Less successful, but still highly successful, was the paralysis and destruction of the ballistic missile capability of Iran. It turned out that, this is not surprising, Iran had a much greater capability than was estimated by intelligence. And here also I want to digress for a moment because I think this is important. With all due respect to intelligence, and both the United States and Israel have very good intelligence services, their ability to see everything is non-existent. And a regime like Iran and organizations like Hezbollah that want, and Hamas in its day, when they want to hide things, will succeed in hiding certain things from outside intelligence. In this case, it's quantity, but it was also to some extent quality. The Iranians had sworn for years that they didn't have ballistic missiles that could go beyond a certain range, and lo and behold, they do. Now, if you're shocked that they lied, that's very nice. I'm not. But they have a much more resilient ballistic missile capability and drone capability than was estimated. And that was very, very heavily hit. Now, we in Israel suffered the consequence, not so much of the miscalculation, but the reality that ballistic missiles can come in two varieties. So we're talking about conventional warheads. Nuclear warheads are a whole different game. In the first rounds, going back to the pre-12-day campaign and during the 12-day campaign, the Iranians were firing barrages of 60, 80, 100 ballistic missiles at a time against Israeli cities. What that meant was that an enormous effort had to be put into intercepting them, and some got through regardless because they simply overwhelmed the interceptor capability and then included American participation in the interceptions. The Iranians would very much like to continue doing that, but that they don't have that capability. So what they did over the period after February 28th is operate on a strategy of harassment. And I know because I was on the receiving end of it. I lived near Haifa, and we had nights where we pretty much didn't sleep because they would fire 2 missiles at Haifa now, or 3. Now, the interception capability of the Israeli military is not 100%. It was never billed to be 100%. But at 85 or 90%, it meant that 1 out of 10 on the average, and of course averages are loose, could be 2 out of 10, we're going to get through the interception. But regardless, Sirens went off, putting millions of people into safe rooms and shelters, not knowing whether the interception was going to work, number one. And number two, if it did work, massive pieces of missile were going to fall that could be extremely lethal if you're not in a safe room in a concrete shelter box. So the result was that for over a month, Israelis were not sleeping well, to the tune of twice, three times a night being awakened, spending the net time of nearly an hour from the siren till going back to bed, and then 2 hours later doing it all over again. And of course, some got through, and there were casualties, and I'm not belittling either the damage or the casualties, but from what they wanted to do, what they had done in the past, and what they planned to do, this was a tremendous reduction in their capabilities. In addition, two other things, or three other targets, target groups were aimed at. One was industry. In other words, what happened was that a decision was made not only to reduce their capability, for example, their missile capability, but also reduce their ability to recover from that. So fuel production, missile production, steel production were all hit. None of those had an effect on Iran's immediate capability. In other words, the missiles that existed were not affected by that, but it does affect their ability to rebuild going into the future. No way of measuring that. Countries are notoriously good at rebuilding destroyed industry, but certainly months, perhaps longer, if that situation continues. The command and control capabilities of the IRGC and the Basij were also hit, along with their leadership, and that speaks to the perhaps possibility of a successful uprising into the future. I'm going to hold off on that for a moment. The other targets that began and are now being threatened again by President Trump are bridges and infrastructure and electrical generating capability, which on the one hand sounds like, who cares? I will tell you that those targets will also put the regime in a much weakened position in the eventuality of a popular uprising. So I'm going to conclude with this. The grand scheme, as far as I can tell, the great victory has to be regime change. If all of this ends with the Khomeiniist regime still in power, and it doesn't matter whether it's the so-called moderates who are absolute extremists or the so-called extremists who are absolute extremists, we're back on track to be having to do this again in 2 years or in 3 years or in 5 years or whatever. The nuclear program is still in place, the ballistic missile program is still in place, and the regime continues to be what it is. And this is typical of hardcore ideological regimes. This is not uniquely Islamic. The Islamic element adds a certain je ne sais quoi, but it doesn't have to be a religious ideology. It doesn't have to be an Islamic ideology. Any hardcore ideological regime is would be in the same position. Stopping now and leaving them in power is the moral equivalent of stopping World War II in Europe in March 1945 and saying we beat the Nazis up badly enough, they've learned the lesson. Anybody who thinks that Hitler ever learned the lesson doesn't understand who Hitler was or what the Nazi regime was. Having said that, regime change has to come from within. It was a lesson learned in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Unless America and the West want to completely, thoroughly, absolutely occupy Iran on the model of Germany and Japan of World War II, simply taking down the regime and saying, well, we're going to hang out here and do some nation building is not going to work. And it's a bad idea. The best hope And really, the only hope of success is for an internal uprising. And we know there's an opposition. I can't tell you how powerful it is. I can tell you it's not very well organized. And that's a mixed blessing, because if it was well organized, the Basij and the IRGC would have rounded them up and killed them. They are somewhat dispersed, but there's still a very strong anti-regime sentiment that, if given the opportunity, with sufficient weakening of the regime, they could possibly rise up. I say possibly because I can't put a percentage on it, and actually succeed in overthrowing, with help from the outside, perhaps with organizational help from the outside. Anybody who doesn't think that the CIA and the Mossad are operating in Iran doesn't understand the situation, but they're not doing it. It is a facilitation of the population doing it themselves. And they're going to have to decide. A final word on that: if they don't overthrow the regime, and I'll say this again across the boards throughout history, regimes don't survive for a very long period without at least the tacit support of, or acquiescence of, a significant portion of the population. If the population acquiesces to the existence of this regime, they own it. Just as the Germans owned the Nazis, the Japanese owned Imperial Japan, the Iraqis owned Saddam, etc., etc. I can give you a very long list. If they don't overthrow it, they are going to be faced with future armed conflict that is going to cause more damage to their country than has already been caused. And it's on them to throw out the people who are causing it, and that's the regime that's there. Ah, on that happy note, I'm going to stop here, give you a chance to ask questions. I didn't speak much about what happened in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and that sort of thing. It's a subject in of itself. I'll be happy to address it if you like, but I wanted to cover the Iran picture up until now. I intentionally didn't discuss what's happened over the past couple of days because nobody knows where that's going. Will Trump back down? Won't he back down? Will he cut a deal? Won't he cut a deal? How much pressure from within? How much pressure from without? What effect does oil price, the Dow, and CNN news cycle have on all of this? These are all variables that we're just going to have to watch and wait and see how it plays out. Those are all things that we're watching on the news literally. I mean, I checked this 5 minutes before I went on today. I hope that everything I just said is still relevant, because things are changing at that speed.
Yeah.
So on that note, David.
Yeah, thank you,
hand
Elliot.
over to
Thank
you.
you so much. If you have questions, please type your question in the chat. Type your question in the chat, please, and I will relay it to Elliot. You can remain muted if you would. I know there are questions out there. I guess, Elliot, just while the questions are being typed,
Sure.
I think it's what I'm hearing, and which is kind of what I expected, is there's a whole much more that we don't know than we do know.
Okay.
Not certainly with regard to what is coming, what's next, but in some ways with what's already taken place. When you have the Arab states that have been under attack,
Yeah.
never mind that killing another Muslim is one of the seven mortal sins in Islam.
Does it count for Shiites?
Does it, well, yeah. And of course, the Iranians are murdering Muslims among their own people, at least who identify as Muslims, right? Um, I mean, it's just, you mentioned miraculous achievements, and I think I don't shy away from the word miraculous myself. I had a teacher who said, I don't believe in miracles, I rely on them. Uh, and to find several of these Gulf states, Muslim states, siding with Israel is something no one could have conceived not so long ago, right? So,
Okay, so first of all, it comes back to something I said earlier. When when they're holding a gun to your head, it sort of narrows your and focuses your decision making. Let's keep in mind that the Muslim non-Muslim divide is only one of many crisscross fissures in the Middle East. Uh, the
yeah,
Iranians,
yeah,
let's remember, are not Arab.
right.
Aside from aside from the Shiite Sunni issue, which I think in many cases is overstated, there's the Persian Arab issue, which I don't think can be overstated. I think that we're talking about a 1,000+ year old conflict that hasn't gone away.
Well, yeah,
Um,
Nebuchadnezzar, right? So,
okay, yeah, you want to go back
so
that far, sure,
Cyrus,
right,
but yeah.
right.
Okay, I have some
So
questions, but go. Do you have something more you want to add on this?
yeah, no, just that when they're shooting at you, and when you're under military stress, making friends and enemies. I think the best example was Churchill supporting Stalin after Hitler invaded Russia, and
Yeah,
Churchill, of course, famously anti-communist, vocally anti-communist, and they asked him, "Well, how can you support Stalin?" And his answer was, "If Hitler invaded hell, I would make a pact with the devil."
yeah,
Uh, so I think when the Iranians started firing missiles into the Gulf states, they decided, I won't go so far as a pact with the devil, but they said, you know what, Israel's a better deal than the Ayatollahs.
yeah. Who are trying to kill us? Yeah. I have a question from Jerry. She wants to know, do most Israelis hope for a continuation of the war in order to take out more of Iran's capability, or would they prefer an end to the fighting without eliminating the threat?
I think overwhelmingly Israelis want to see Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas finished with, and now. And the and now is for a few reasons. One, we're already geared up.
Yeah,
Uh, despite all nonsensical social media stuff that I've seen, Israel has not lost stamina. As a matter of fact, um, my what I do in the reserves now is work with reserve units and motivation in reserve units, and I and my colleagues have been not shocked, but pleasantly surprised at the level of motivation that remains among reservists in terms of showing up for service and the like. So that's number one. Number two, as we've learned over cycle after cycle, they also have a learning curve. The next time around is going to be
yeah,
harder, not easier.
right.
Uh, so now is the time to do it. They've been weakened. We're up and ready for it. And an inconclusive result that sort of makes believe that we have made tactical gains, no question about it, major tactical gains, but nothing irreparable from their side. They can
Yeah,
rebuild, they can go back to the drawing board. And as I said before, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, can't predict that. But to do this again in 5 years, no, let's do it now and let's be done with it.
yeah. Uh, Mara would like for you to comment on the Israeli government's public relations efforts. Are they coordinating that in a strategic manner to go with the military campaign? Of course, the Americans have that issue
Right.
too, but what about the Israelis?
Here I'm going to say two parallel truths. One is that the Israeli information campaign is, I'll be generous and say mediocre. I think it's less than that. So that's one truth. And the other truth is, I'm not convinced that it makes any difference.
Yeah.
The the playing field is so stacked against Israel in terms of mass media as well as social media that the best you can do is get out information, but it's being clobbered when your major news outlets are reporting Hamas lies as truth without verification. There isn't a lot you can do to overcome that.
Yeah.
Once again, that doesn't absolve Israel from doing a better job, but at the same time, I think that even an outstanding job would only have a marginal effect on the outcome right now.
Yeah. I would agree. Um, Kenny, our dear friend, Dr. Price, raises the question, aren't there some majors or colonels in the Iranian army who would like to get rid of the IRGC and take down the regime?
Okay, so the short answer is yes. The the institution that I am watching, or I will be watching, in the case of an uprising, is the Iranian armed force, the army, so to speak. Okay, let's keep in mind that Iran, like most dictatorships and following the model of Nazi Germany, has two armed forces. It's got a national army and the IRGC, which is the moral and organizational equivalent of the SS,
Yeah.
the army of the party, not of the state. Now, and this is typical of many, if not all, fascist style totalitarian regimes. They can call it the Revolutionary Guards, they can call it the Presidential Guard, they can call it all sorts of stuff like that. The the guards, so to speak, the IRGC, are loyal to the regime. They work for the regime. The army is loyal to the state. There's a difference. Now, typically in uprisings, the army goes with the side that it believes is going to win.
Yeah.
And in doing so, actually create a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, if the army decides that the regime is going to win, it stays loyalist, and that assures the failure of the uprising revolution. If, on the other hand, it believes that the revolution is going to win, it will go over to the revolution, either tacitly or actively, and virtually guarantee the success of the revolution. But here, I'm going to say again, the key element in decision making is who do they believe will win? Because if they choose wrong, they're dead.
Yeah. Yeah. It's more existential than ideological with them.
Yes.
Bill, Bill liked what you had to say. Bill McManaway. He says, "Brilliant rundown, my friend. He says we've damaged the head of the snake. You know, the Islamist political leadership. What should we expect to do with the IRGC, the heart of the snake?" And you touched on that a little bit. But is it going to grow another head, or has if it hasn't already?
Okay. So first of all, we've done a good deal of damage to the head of the IRGC as well, in multiple levels of command. And here I'll add Hezbollah to that mix. Any of these systems, whether the Iranian regime or Hezbollah, that are left to their own devices, will spend a bit of time licking their wounds and will begin to regenerate. And we've seen this happen over and over again. It would happen here as well. It'll take time. The elimination of the leadership, and once again, I'm not talking about the individual. I want to actually spend a moment on this. America has a conceptual problem, and it's not current. It goes back in what I call over personalizing the enemy. In other words, the enemy is characterized as an individual. The Iraqi problem was Saddam Hussein. The Al Qaeda problem was Osama bin Laden. The problem here was Khamenei, etc. Maduro in Venezuela. When in fact, We're talking about institutions with ranks of leadership, and the guy at the top, certainly not a good person and certainly deserves to be taken out, but simply taking out the leader is not sufficient. So what was done here, and Israel essentially pioneered it against Hezbollah and Hamas, is to take out levels of leadership horizontally across the boards. Level 2, level 3, level 4. That has enormous tactical implications. It means the organization is paralyzed. It finds it difficult to operate. It's not just a one slot that needs to be filled and everybody else can sort of work their way around it, but it's temporary. It will take them, and here again, I'll say 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, to generate new leadership, train new leadership, have it trained by the Chinese, by the Russians. They have no shortage of buddies out there. And if Iran is allowed to stay in place, I was speaking about Hezbollah, but Iran, they will generate of their own, maybe not on the same quality, perhaps on higher quality. It'll take them a bit of time to gain experience, and we'll be right back where we started from.
Yeah. We have several questions raised by Juliana. Juliana's from Iran. She has family and contacts in Iran. So her questions come from, it's in many ways the inside, you might say. She
Okay.
mentions that there's a new militia that is anti-regime called Immortal Guard, the Immortal Guard. Young people who want to take on the regime, take down the regime. But she asks, is there any plan to arm those who want to take down the regime? They can't do it unarmed very well, right? I mean, how can
I,
that happen? CIA,
I'll
Mossad, or what?
right. I'll repeat what I said earlier. There's no doubt in my mind that both Mossad and CIA and others are working within Iran. Arming in there's a catch-22 here, and I alluded to this, so let me be a little more specific. A Actually, let me go back one step in terms of conceptualization, and I'll get into the specifics. When you're dealing with organizations that deal in conflict and violence, there's a balance between resiliency and power. The more powerful, the less resilient. The more resilient, the less powerful. I'm being very simplistic about
Uh,
it, but
yeah,
okay. Power means tight organization, hierarchy, uh, essentially a pyramid kind of form of organization. It's less resilient because an IRGC Basij counter operation can round up the leadership, get rid of them, and now you have a headless organization. It's easy to penetrate an organization of that type, relatively speaking. A diffuse system, think more in terms of network than organization, is less powerful. It's more decentralized, but far more resilient, because if a cell is compromised, the rest of the network is not.
yeah,
Arming and training requires, doing it well, requires organization rather than network. So I'm going to guess here that by maintaining, at least at this stage, a network type of system, uh, it's loosely connected. There's some armaments I believe are going in there. Some are being picked up. There's a lot of weapons in Iran. But ultimately,
yeah,
historically, the arming of an uprising comes from taking over a military installation or a police installation and getting the weapons from there.
yeah,
Smuggling weapons in would not be sufficient to take on an organization like the IRGC or the Basij. What I do believe, and I here again I alluded to it, I can go into detail. What I do believe is that one of the reasons that the bridges in particular are being targeted, and will be if this goes forward, is to isolate regions and subregions of Iran so that if there is an uprising in one place, the IRGC Basij will not be able to move forces from other places to put it down. If one area can be liberated by an uprising and its resources, I'm talking about military resources, weapons, munitions, and the like, can be taken, that could be the
Yeah,
launching point of a much larger uprising that could overthrow the regime.
very good. Did you see the new breaking news that the Iranians decided they're not going to talk with the Americans?
Yes,
Do
yes.
you see any implications of that, or is this just more gesturing and
Oh,
gesticulating or
okay.
what?
So first of all, I put up. You're all cordially invited to go onto my Facebook page from last week. Um, my message to Donald, dear Donald, welcome to Ayatollah's Persian flying carpet uh, shop. You're welcome to negotiate. Here are the rules. So one of the rules is public statements have no value, neither do private statements. Um, Agreements are not the end of negotiation, they're the opening gambit. Uh, Here I'm going to say that I think that the regime, and there's also a talk about the fragmentation of the regime. I'm not convinced. I'm not sure that it's not so. I'm not convinced that there is a fragmentation of the hardline IRGC against the more moderate, which doesn't exist, pragmatic Arakchi and his people. I think they're all playing the same game and playing the West off against itself. But they've been seen as having been weakened by the popular opposition, and they have to show that they are in power, they are winning or have won. And one of the
Yeah,
ways you do that in the Middle East is saying, I'm not negotiating with you,
yeah.
because image matters more than reality for them.
Well, that's something that many of us don't quite understand in the West.
No, no.
Uh, just one, what about, what do you make of reports of ISIS operatives moving into Iran, Afghan, Syrian, or the Hashid al-Shabi jihadists from Iraq as hired murderers, basically?
Right.
Um,
Um,
does that play in the mix of uprising? I mean, they will kill people in the streets. They will.
yes,
They do.
absolutely. Look,
They
but
do.
but I mean, so does the Basij.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, in the good old days, they brought in Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is busy at the moment. Yeah, it
Yeah.
didn't fit into their their monthly program. Uh, Look, one of my iron laws is that uprisings and revolutions succeed when the rebels have more people willing to die than the regime is willing and able to kill.
Well,
The regime has shown itself willing to kill untold numbers.
yeah.
The, the question becomes, how do you reduce the capability below a level that the rebels are willing to accept losses of? Obviously it's a theoretical equation. It's not one that you can work out in real numbers. If outsiders are being brought in, they will also have to be dealt with. And dealing with can be something that is done by the United States and Israel from the air, in the sense of, I'm going to say this one more time, not physically overthrowing the regime with ground forces, but weakening the regime and its allies and proxies through airstrikes, either by taking them out, isolating them by cutting off infrastructure and roads and bridges and things like that, and allowing them to be defeated piecemeal. But these are all tactical questions that have to be dealt with on a day-to-day basis as things are happening.
Yeah, thank you. Alicia says that she says I read last week before the ceasefire that there was a group of Israeli anti-war protesters in Tel Aviv. What is the percentage of Israelis feeling that way? She says, my understanding was that most of Israel want peace, even if it means keep going on with the war to finish this cancer off, to finish off Iran. Yeah.
As usual, a few dozen or even a couple of hundred people are going to get front page man bites dog kind of headlines.
Yeah.
Um, there is no anti-war movement in Israel. The fact is that there have been no service refusals. There have been people who said, I can't go because of family, financial, and this is neither justification nor support or opposition. There are people who've done 400 or 500 days of reserve duty since October 7th,
Yeah.
and there's there's an emotional mental limit that I can recognize without accepting as legitimate. But that's
Right.
not the same thing as I'm not going because I don't believe in the cause, and that is simply non-existent. So
Yeah.
you're always going to have a few people. They're always the radicals, the whatever it is I'm against it gang, but they don't amount to anything in terms of numbers in the country.
Yeah. That's the last thing we have so far, and we're coming up to the end of our times. Kenny's wondering if the Gulf countries now see Israel as a strong friend with whom they may have some alliance. I mean, it could be Abraham Accords or something along that line. But let me add for a second, when you say the Gulf states, each one is a realm unto
Is
itself.
its own story. That's right.
So
Each one is its own story.
there's not a block there. So you have to
Correct.
take it case by case. Yeah. What do you think?
All right. So I'm gonna I see something paradoxical here. If we succeed in we collectively in overthrowing the regime in Iran, that will reduce the incentive of the Gulf states to make peace with Israel.
Yes. Yeah.
And here, let's keep in mind that the tacit alliance that we have now is an alliance of necessity. It's an alliance of convenience. It's not an alliance of friendship or any deep
Right.
love.
Right.
But as you said, and I agree with you 100%, each of these places is its own entity. They have their own ideologies, their own demographics. Speaking of the
Mhm.
Gulf states and putting the Emirates and Qatar in the same breath is
Yeah.
absurd.
Doesn't work.
They're entirely different.
Yeah. Yes. Elliot, thank you so much. Amazing
My
as
pleasure as
usual.
always.
Uh, I have very little to correct you on, but when we talk
Thank you.
privately,
I appreciate that.
I can do that. Any parting shots? Any last? We have like five
Uh,
minutes from you, Elliot, or well,
I
go ahead. This is your
I
show.
no, I I covered what I meant to cover. The only thing I'll just add is stay tuned because this stuff is changing by the hour, if not by the minute.
Yeah,
And we're in an extremely dynamic uh, situation that uh, one if we end up going back to fighting, which I think is reasonably likely,
yeah,
um, these are things that also can be changed in a moment by no, nobody can predict the outcome of a battle. There's a famous saying that no plan survives the first contact with the enemy, and it's just one of these things we'll have to watch uh, from one moment to the next.
Well, Jerry does have one final question. If you can
Sure.
give us a short answer, do you think there's a chance that the fighting with Hezbollah is going to stop? I
No,
mean, Hezbollah's not going
I
to
think
stop, are
no. Hezbollah's raison d'etre is to destroy Israel and annihilate the Jewish people. So
they?
as
Yeah.
long as there's either an Israel or as long as there are both Israel and Hezbollah, there's a war.
What about the Lebanese government? Are they any help or not?
Uh,
They
at the
aren't.
moment, no. At the moment, no. But again, we're in the middle of a dynamic. We'll see. They
Yeah,
should be. They should be. But Alun is playing coy, and it's not clear why. Alun is the president of Lebanon,
yeah,
and I think that Trump is too busy, and legitimately, I don't say this is criticism, is too busy dealing with Iran to really worry much about Lebanon right
yes. Well, uh, again, thank you so much. I'm sure we all leave our audience with you understanding more than when we came in. So we appreciate that. Or certainly, speaking for myself, that's the case. And you and I will be in touch, Elliot, about other things
now. Okay,
before long. Just I hope you're
very
getting
good.
a little sleep now.
I
Um,
am. I'm trying to build up for the next round.
well, there there could well be another round, as you know.
Yeah.
So keep your shelter stocked with whatever you need.
As long as long as they let me do my barbecue on Wednesday for Israel Independence Day, after that they
All
can do
right.
whatever they want.
Yes. Yom Ha'atzmaut, Yom HaZikaron. Yes,
Yeah,
we do. Okay, we have something to celebrate. Not just Israeli Jews,
absolutely.
the Jewish people have something to celebrate and rejoice in. Uh, and it's thanks to Israel. It's thanks to the idea of that those of us who live outside have have the joy of this celebration. Without you guys, we would the Jewish people would be lost, truly. So thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Bye bye.